morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whichever you prefer, or whichever applies to you, whichever you prefer. That is totally your thing. And welcome to the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub, our first session on veterans in apprenticeship and career. We're going to be talking about understanding, engaging, and empowering veterans in transition from the military and into apprenticeship into career. So very excited to be presenting today with my good friend, Dr. Kimberly Harris, who we'll be hearing from momentarily. Just to give us a little scope of what we'll be talking about today, here's our basic agenda. So we're going to start off talking about some key statistics. Now, of course, we know with statistics, they are not perfect predictors, right? But they're trends. They're things that we certainly want to know about. They're things that begin the process of really the first step in all workforce development, which is understanding. It's beginning the process of understanding folks before we've even met them. And then that real understanding begins once we do meet them and can dig in and really start to understand their situation and their individual realities much better. We're going to talk about some statistics specifically applicable to veterans in apprenticeship, as well as veterans in the workforce overall. We're going to then go into talking about how do we take this terrifically talented group of folks, and how do we support them? How do we engage them in this apprenticeship process? How do we engage them in this overall career development process so that as they're going through this transition, they're transitioning into a really strong civilian career. And then finally, we're going to talk about some of the pieces that are specific to that transition, and which is a truly, of course, a very sizable change in someone's life, transitioning from that military service to their life afterward in the civilian career marketplace. And then finally, we are going to, as we always do, we're going to talk with Dr. Harris about, as we're trying to implement some of these different programmatic pieces, how do we evaluate and make sure that what we're doing is having the impact that we want it to. So as we almost always do, we'll be wrapping things up with Kim just talking with us about how do you make sure, if we're going to do all these great things, how do you make sure they're working the way they want? How do you make sure that we are, to use Dr. Harris's wonderful phrase, how are we grounding in our intent as a way to end up meeting the goals that we're going to be talking about through the course of this session? So a little bit of a preamble here. One thing we do want to speak about, we are going to be, in the course of this session, we're going to be talking about suicide and suicidal ideation, which is a very present, a very real factor in the lives of many transitioning veterans, many veterans generally. Of course, that is a very difficult thing to talk about. It is a very sad thing to talk about. So we want to begin the session by reminding everyone about the 988 Crisis Lifeline. We see that, of course, that's 988 on our phone. That is, we see a website down here, 988lifeline.org, and a great quote from their site. At this 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, we understand that life's challenges can sometimes be difficult. If you're facing mental health struggles, emotional distress, alcohol or drug use concerns, or just need someone to talk to, their caring counselors at the 988 Crisis Lifeline are here for you because you are not alone. Really a wonderful resource. We talk about it to folks like you so that you can talk about it to the folks that you serve, but also so that when you need it, when I need it, when Dr. Harris needs it, that we all have this to turn to, as we may very well at different points in our lives need a resource like this. Also, of course, recognizing that in the work you do working with other folks who have encountered some pretty significant barriers in their lives, well, you're probably a lot of the difficulty that they're struggling with, that's going to impact you as well. So as service providers, as folks who support folks who need this support, we always want to be mindful of this. We always want to be sure that you are taking care of yourselves first and foremost. Just like when we're flying on an airplane and they say first you've got to get your mask in place if that comes out to be necessary before you help the person next to you. Well, this is the same thing. You've got to help yourself before we can really end up helping the folks that we want to help. With that aside, again, a great resource and just a little bit of a preamble as to what we're going to be talking about in this session. To some extent, just so folks are aware, I am going to hand things over to my friend, Dr. Kimberly Harris, who's going to start talking with us about some of the statistics that apply to veterans in the workforce and apprenticeship. Dr. Harris, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Corey. We really appreciate you grounding us in all of these important things, setting us up for what's to come, and also reminding us of what's ultimately most important, self-care, and making sure that we're able to take care of each other and take care of ourselves first so that we can take care of each other. So let's get a little bit into this conversation. With each of these webinars that we have hosted, we really wanted to level set by just kind of giving you a little bit of the backdrop and key statistics around who is what's like the prototype, if you will, or what's like the persona, I think is a better way of putting that, around who are these amazing individuals, whether they be veterans, whether they be women, individuals with disabilities, or a convergence of those identities. Who are they in the workplace and what are they seeking? So when we think about veterans in workforce and in apprenticeship in particular, it is important to keep in mind that we're talking about roughly 200,000 military members transition into civilian careers and civilian lives on an annual basis, right? And what does this mean? These individuals with all this amazing lived experience, this amazing high skill technical training, from so many dimensions, because the armed forces is its own, it's really a microcosm or maybe a macrocosm of the world that we live in. You name it, in terms of sectors of economy, they exist within the armed services. And these amazing men and women have been trained to do these jobs just impeccably. It's also important to keep in mind that about 1 in 3 veterans have some service-connected disability. So these are what are disabilities that veterans, individuals have encountered or have had. My verbiage is kind of, I'm struggling. These are disabilities that veterans have encountered or acquired as a result of their service. And those disabilities can take on many different, they can be physical disabilities, they can be other types of disabilities. And this does not mean that these are the only disabilities. Some veterans may even, some individuals may enter service who have had or who have disabilities upon injury. But we're talking about now individuals who have acquired a disability as a result of their service. So we're talking about 1 in 3. We're also, it's in mindful, it's also very important to stay mindful of the fact that roughly 8 million veterans are a part of our workforce. So what does that mean? That means that we already work with amazing men and women who bring with them or who bring into our different places and spaces of work amazing training, experiences, and sometimes challenges, and that they find their way to persist and to thrive in these places and spaces. And 250,000 of the veterans, in light of all of the things that we know, right? The training that they receive in the military, all that they bring and all that they can bring coming into the workforce, still 250,000 veterans were unemployed as recently as 2024. So, and the thing to be mindful of when we're talking about that slice of this amazing community, roughly 60% of those individuals who were unemployed as recently as 2024, they were basically in their working prime years. They were between the ages of 25 and 54. So when we think about, as we've been talking about over the course of this webinar series, we always talk about this notion of the importance of being mindful of what is the cost that's incurred from the standpoint of a business, of an employer, when we aren't fully engaging every facet of our community, right? So much to offer. So when we think about that percentage there, 60% were in between the ages of 25 and 54. So those prime working years. And then roughly 28% of veterans have a bachelor's degree or higher. This is training that many have received while serving their country. This is also training that many have received. Some receive that, or they have this credentialing. They have these degrees upon entry. There's so many different ways in which these veterans receive this training and get this credentialing and degrees. But it's important to know that roughly 28% of veterans have this have bachelor's degrees or more. Because think about it, we're talking about individuals who are used to multitasking, who are used to doing work well, and who are used to challenge. So it's not surprising that this highly skilled, highly trained group of community members also would be highly degreed and trained as well. So, with that in mind, thinking about these stats, as we think about veterans and apprenticeship overall, there are so many different ways that, when we think about different types of credentialing, different types of training, there are so many different ways that veterans are able to avail themselves of these opportunities. All of which are due to the fact that we're talking about men and women who have basically worked and paid that price, even if it wasn't in the ultimate sacrifice as we think about when we think about the time and the degree of rigor and what they're called upon to do. In exchange for that, they have some of the ways in which programs that are available to help them to further their career, basically as a continuation of all of the amazing contribution that they have made in society. So veterans can use their post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. They can also, there's a really a growing opportunity, if you will, for veterans to take advantage of apprenticeship opportunities that really recognize the fact that when we're talking about veterans, we are talking about a group of individuals who are primed to contribute almost from day one. Even if they don't have the specific subject matter skill, that learning curve tends to be not as broad because they are used to what it means to engage in rigorous training and rigorous execution of the learning while they're also doing many other things in service to country. So definitely programs that are responsive to their skill set, to their lived experience are definitely growing. It's also important to keep in mind that veterans constituted roughly around 8% of all registered apprenticeship participants as of as recently this year. So when we think about, that proportion again, and once again, that unmet potential or leaving that opportunity unseized, it's really important to keep in mind that we're talking about a swath of community that we still have yet to truly leverage all that they have to offer in many different apprenticeship spaces. And it's also important to keep in mind that military experience can potentially include almost any kind of competency. This goes back to what I was just saying a minute ago is that you're talking about when we look at armed forces, we're talking about every sector of our economy being represented, from education to manufacturing to engineering to traffic control, you name it. And many of these sectors, within these sectors, are many apprenticeship opportunities. And we're talking about a group of individuals who are primed to do these jobs incredibly well. So when we think about that value proposition, who are veterans? Who are they in terms of who they are in terms of training and lived experience? And who are they in terms of what they are presently doing and what they could do in the workforce? It is so important to keep these things in mind. And also, as we think about what are veterans seeking, every time we pose this question, it's really also to just keep that through line ever present of veterans are seeking no more or no less than any other member of community, right? They are seeking work that's purposeful. They're seeking work that leverages all that they've done and contributed and can really tap into that so that they can have a challenging career that taps into their knowledge, skill, and ability. They're also seeking work like anyone else that has growth opportunity to it, right? But once again, we're talking about a group of individuals who are, used to being called upon for challenging, rigorous assignments, long challenging and rigorous assignments, while they're also being called upon to do and perform and show up in other ways. So they are looking for opportunities that acknowledge that see that tap into that. And definitely opportunities that definitely enable them to continue to build community, just as they did in armed service, right? We know that so much of armed service is about the we and not the I. It is about the team building. So opportunities for professional development, for advancement and mentorship that basically help them to challenge themselves and be able to set goals and meet goals, but do that as part of a team, right? And we know that that's one of the benefits of mentorship is the relationship building that comes with, forming, these working relationships that oftentimes have this ability to grow into some personal relationships. It's really real bonding that is not unfamiliar to veterans. So they're definitely looking at ways that cultivate, support, promote those types of team building in environments. And definitely, this translational component, all of these skills, right, that are definitely relevant and pertinent and necessary in the armed forces and in the military environment definitely translate into the civilian workplace. And veterans are definitely looking for opportunities to basically be in those spaces, to contribute in those spaces, and to grow in those spaces. So also when we think about just this overall value proposition, we've talked a little bit about that, but thinking about those that persona, that bundle of skills, those bundle of experiences that veterans have. These are individuals who know what it is to truly engage in what we call servant leadership. To work at different phases of an organization or different roles within an organization, frontline to conceptualizing the plan, executing the plan, all the things. So tons of service experience. Definitely what it means to be a leader, right? To plan, to organize, to control, right? To motivate, and to work and walk alongside. They have an array of skills and experiences and backgrounds because, as we said before, the military is, it is a true mirror of, it has all of the facets of all the of civilian economy. So any sector that you can imagine, it is present in the military. And veterans have been called upon to work and perform and contribute in each of those spaces and across those sectors. So we're talking about individuals who have, experience that spans law enforcement, education, you name it, you can imagine it. It is there in the armed services, and veterans have that experience in many of those and all of those facets. So when we talk about that value proposition for recruiting and onboarding veterans in civilian workplaces and spaces, we're talking about folks who bring subject matter knowledge. We're talking about folks who bring that management knowledge. We're talking about folks who bring all kinds of leadership knowledge. They are adaptive leaders. They are motivational leaders. They are successful leaders. And we definitely want to leverage that in the civilian workspace. So as we think about what would it mean, what could it mean for employees with intentionality to think about what it means to craft a recruitment plan and strategy, we have a few recommendations in mind. It makes sense, and we definitely encourage employers to actively recruit and retain veterans in apprenticeships. And what that may mean is that you need to be mindful of who are your allies, who are your partners in this work, whose voices need to be ever present as you think about and think through what it means to actively recruit so that that can translate into retention and growth of veterans within these various corporate environments and different sectors of our civilian economy. Oftentimes, every time, it's going to also require including, leaning in, and leaning on the leadership and the insight of veterans who may already be in your places of employment, leaning on your team members who are veterans, who have that experience, so that you can be mindful and think about where do you need to go? Who do you need to be in conversation with to think about a successful recruitment and a recruitment strategy that is not only successful in the short run, but is successful across time? So definitely building those partnerships, also supporting veterans to create and maintain support networks. We know that with all of the incredible training and experiences that veterans have, also there are some challenges that we can't imagine as civilians if we have never been in those places and spaces, and if we don't hold that veteran identity. So it's important to trust and hear our veteran team members, trust what they have to say about those experiences and the things needed and the supports needed so that they can be successful contributors to the organization, and making sure that we stand ready, that you stand ready to help them, even if it's not directly supplying or offering those supports, but walking alongside and giving them even the resource of time if needed to identify and work in those supports into the organization. And definitely making sure that veteran to veteran and veteran to non-veteran mentorship opportunities and networks are built and thrive within your organization. Those are essential because what we are really trying to make sure that we have are relationship networks, if you will, within the organization that promote the thriving and success of all employees, of all team members, and definitely our veterans. So these are some things that we would definitely recommend. And with that being said, right on cue, I will lob it right over again to Corey to talk us through and walk us through what it means to engage and work to empower veterans in the in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. That is just a great foundational information for us to work from. As just as you say, as we think about how are we engaging folks in this process here, and just a little bit of background before we even dive into that. As we look at the Department of Labor, we look at the Department of Defense and the work that they do to support military members who are in transition to civilian lives, civilian careers, out of the military into those new lives. There's a program called the Transition Assistance Program, very aptly and directly named, which we like that's all about providing that support. Now we can have a long conversation about how effective is it, what could be better, all those kinds of things. I personally am of the opinion that this is a program that's getting better and better and better. And one of the things that they're really focusing on as they do that is really creating much more of a pipeline, a supported pipeline, so that folks are going from that engaged, being active military service members, and then transitioning not just out, but into civilian lives, civilian careers, civilian apprenticeship. So there's a real focus on how do we make sure that folks get almost immediate access to the services that we see at the American Job Centers. How do folks get access to registered apprenticeship programs that are going to build on the typically very thorough training that they already will have received as military members? How do we do all that? So this is really, so the reason I preface everything we're about to say is to say that hopefully if you're out there and you operate a registered apprenticeship program, or if you're an employer who is hiring people out of it, or it's sort of being part of the sponsorship group, the leadership group in a registered apprenticeship program, certainly hope you're already seeing veterans coming through the door, veterans coming through this process, coming into this work that you're doing, so that you've got access to this great talent. But all by way of saying that as we talk about this probably isn't going to be abstract. We hope that you're already seeing that, yes, there's a great presence of folks in these programs, these registered apprenticeship programs that we are operating. So to think about this, as we typically do, we're going to talk about a somewhat theoretical person. If we want to be very precise, you might say that Kenya is ontologically challenged, meaning Kenya doesn't exactly exist, exactly. But we believe that Kenya is pretty well representative of the situation that a number of transitioning service members might be in. This allows us to ask some questions, bring up some ideas, some things that we want to talk about when talking about supporting veterans in transition. So as we As we get to know Kenya, as supervisors, as registered apprenticeship managers, as co-workers, here are the things that we know. And we're very much on the outside here, right? We're talking about Kenya. And if you watched our sessions on disability, if you've watched any of our sessions, you know that we're big fans of not talking about people. We don't talk about how do we make sure that that we're going to be an employer of choice for women, and let's get Corey, Dave, Bob, and Bill together, and we'll all talk about what it means to be a registered apprenticeship of choice for women, and then hopefully we'll let Kim Harris know what we decided after that great conversation. Of course, that's not how we do business. We prefer to talk with folks, right? We want folks in these groups to be representing themselves, to be having the control and the agency to sort of, of course, tell their own stories, express their own needs, express their own preferences. But in this environment that we are in this webinar, of course, we're going to be just kind of talking theoretically about our theoretical veteran, Kenya. Excuse me. So here's what we know so far. Kenya has retired from the Army after 12 years enlisted. Her military occupational specialty, which for those of you who aren't aware, the MOS, that's kind of the career focus, the skill focus within that military career. Because as Kim said, when we look at particularly the United States military, but any military almost in history, we're looking at a gargantuan economy all of its own. In the United States military, there's someone doing almost every job we can imagine on one level or another. Every skill, every task that we can imagine is somewhere happening within the United States military. So these military occupational specialty, which that is a term specific to the Army, that just tells us what that specialty is. For Kenya, it's our automated logistical specialist, which is a 92A MOS. We also see that as Kenya is kind of sort of adapting to this new environment, she absorbs new information about the formal skills required for her role very quickly. She learns quickly. She's not sort of starry-eyed and not sure what to do about all this new information. She is soaking it up. She's very dynamic. She's performing her role at a very high level very quickly, transitioning very quickly into that high skill role. But it seems, and again, we're talking about on the outside here, we're talking about what someone seems. We're not giving Kenya the chance to speak for herself in this situation, but which is not, of course, how we normally do it. But it seems like, as we just kind of observe Kenya, it just seems like she doesn't particularly like the folks that she's working with. She doesn't particularly like her supervisor. She's not connecting with folks around her. She's not rude. She's not mean. She's not yelling at folks. She's just like, she seems a little standoffish, right? And so, again, this is all what we're observing from the outside. So now our next step would be, again, because we don't have actual real Kenya to speak with here, we're going to speculate a bit. And again, if we were in the real world, we wouldn't sit back and speculate and say, well, what does Corey, who is not someone who served in the military, what does Corey kind of speculate is going on with Kenya? No, of course, we would go and ask Kenya. But since you can't ask Kenya, we're going to kind of speculate as to what could be going on here, what could be explaining some of these things that we've seen. On the one hand, this very high level of performance, but counterbalanced by a seemingly a sort of lack of comfort with the social aspects of the workplace. So Kenya may, and I should have underlined that may 17 times. We're speculating here. We're on the outside speculating. Kenya may feel uncomfortable in a civilian workplace with civilian teams, all that kind of stuff. Kenya may be new in her transition, and all this is very new to her, and she's just not comfortable. She doesn't know how to interact in this civilian team, which of course, is going to be very, very different than any kind of the military team that is out there. The function, the hierarchy, the way things are done, all of that is going to be different in a civilian workplace. And we cannot possibly underestimate how big a change we're talking about here and how much it demands of veterans, transitioning service members and veterans, as they're going through this transition. That is a huge change, and we need to keep that in mind. We'll talk more about that as we go on. Part and parcel of that, she might be uncertain of the social expectations of the workplace. Again, the social setup of a civilian workplace is going to be very different than a military workplace, than a military situation. Again, I cannot speak with direct knowledge. I did not serve in the military. You'll find I repeat that probably a little bit too much, but that's better than being mistaken for representing myself as having experience that I most certainly do not. she just might be adapting to this very different, much less hierarchical, often from what I've heard in speaking with folks, much less clear, much less direct, much more vague kind of social setup of this situation that we're in. And remember, social applies not just to, well, we went out and grabbed a beer after work, or we all get together for lunch and we talk. There are social aspects to all the work that we do, the hard skills. Talking with my supervisor is a social activity. Talking with colleagues is a social activity. Even if it's about we're doing the work, we're focusing on this, that's still all social, right? Every time we're talking with another person, that's social. And that can, for those of us who are not necessarily the best on the social level, that can, of course, create some complications there, right? Now, another thing that might have happened here that we might want to consider, again, we don't know, we would want to ask Kenya, but we can't do that right now. So we're going to, another speculation is that we might not have successfully what we call translated her skills from the military context that she was working in into the civilian setting. Now we're getting better and better at this. I say we. This is not my work. I shouldn't represent it that way. But if we look at ONET, if we look at My Next Move, there are a number of resources out there. Certainly, if we talk to our DevOps and our leavers, our disabled veteran outreach personnel, and our local veterans employment representatives that we have in most of our American job centers, those folks are going to be very good at saying, okay, here is your MOS, Kenya. Here's some of the things you did. Here's how we translate this. But one of the big challenges that we see for all the progress that's being made in this area is that we can take someone who is operating at a very, very high level in a military context, and just because we on the civilian side don't know how to translate that experience accurately, excuse me, we're just kind of we're kind of knocking folks down a couple pegs. We're taking someone that should have been a vice president, or should have been a unit manager, or should have been a regional supervisor, and we're knocking them down a couple pegs because we look at a military resume and like, I don't understand what any of this means. I mean, I know what supply chain means. Everything past that, I don't know the level, I don't know the intensity. So we are getting better at that, but it's very possible that as Kenya was being supported in her transition, the folks who were supporting her, he might have, it might be the equivalent of she was working on her PhD in the military, and now suddenly we've got her in World Literature 101 trying to get her bachelor's again. I'm using a silly analogy, but you get my point. Because we don't understand, we on the civilian side don't necessarily understand how to translate all those skills. Sometimes we don't give folks the full credit they deserve. So maybe Kenya's feeling like, I should be running this shop based on everything that I know. And here I am kind of as a mid-level, low-level person within it. Maybe she doesn't feel like her true skills are really being used to the extent that they should. And of course, given, as we see Kenya in the workplace, she's knocking it out of the park. She's doing great work. She's absorbing new information. She's like, there's never been an issue of she doesn't know how to do this or she's struggling with that. She's really, really very quickly adapting to the hard skills that this opportunity requires of her. Now, the other things, again, still speculating, but Kenya might be struggling with other aspects of the transition process. We'll say what that means, but quickly translating what it means to struggle with other aspects of the transition process. Well, other aspects of the transition process include every other single thing about Kenya's life. This is not a career transition. This is not quitting a job and getting a new job. It's getting a new housing, it's getting new childcare, it's getting new social setting, most likely going to be in a new town, not necessarily, but still quite likely. It's every aspect of life. Again, we'll talk more about that, but given the scope of change that Kenya is going through here, this might have nothing to do with anything going on in the workplace. She might just really be struggling with this change. With the fact that maybe she left her entire friend group behind in the military. Maybe she's feeling very lonely. Maybe she's feeling disconnected. Maybe she's feeling a sense of, I had everything set up. I had all these connections, and now they're all gone because of this transition that I'm going through. Of course, Kenya will rebuild those things, but we can imagine how difficult that could be in a given moment. And then finally, and again, we're speculating, and this is one where we really need to be careful with our speculations. We don't start making assumptions based on this. It's certainly a factor we'd want to consider. It is possible that Kenya is adapting to a service-connected disability. It is possible that Kenya is adapting to a service-connected disability without even herself understanding that she's doing that. So that is a possibility. And again, as we mentioned, we've got a couple sessions on disability that I hope folks have been able to check out as well. We certainly know that we don't kind of come in from the outside and start diagnosing people. Disability is someone's own business. But of course, we also understand that it might be something that is part of what Kenya's going through. She is under no obligation to tell us about it, particularly if it requires no accommodations, but it might be there. That's just something we want to think about only insofar as it allows us to say, if there's something that Kenya needs, a way that we could support her, then we want to be planning for that. That's the limit to which we're going to be thinking about disability, because otherwise it's all her business. Maybe there are things that we can offer that are going to be supportive. So as we continue to think about Kenya and her situation, just more things that we might be considering for Kenya as she's in the workplace here. So she may feel uncertain how to navigate this far less formal, far less structured team environment that she's finding here on the civilian side of things. Of course, in a civilian workplace, in a registered apprenticeship program, we're not wearing insignias on our chest that tell us what our rank is. We often do not have very, very structured, very formal chain of command, a hierarchy that we're working with. Sometimes, as we said in one of our other sessions here, sometimes the way things work, there might be a team where, oh, Corey's in charge of this team and Kim and Dave are supporting him. Well, but then we go to our next project. Our next meeting after that one is actually the project that Dr. Harris leads, and Dave and Corey and Robin are supporting Dr. Harris. So now that to most of us, that probably sounds perfectly natural. They're like, okay, we have these kind of amorphous teams, and we just adapt to that. And sometimes I'm at the head of the table, and sometimes it's somebody else, and we don't worry too much about that. We just know that that'll all kind of work out. That may seem very, very like stressfully ambiguous to someone who is used to a very different kind of environment. Again, just things we need to keep in mind. As we mentioned before, Kenya may feel uncomfortable managing some of the social aspects of the workplace. And again, remember that when I talk about social aspects of the workplace, we're not just talking about the ice cream for Bob's birthday in the afternoon. We're not just talking about if we all go out and hang out after work for an hour or so. Every time we interact with another human being in the workplace, that's the social aspects of the workplace, and those are going to be very different, as we said. Finally, and this is a this can be a little bit of a nuanced one as well, but Kenya may feel underappreciated by her colleagues who lack military experience. Now, Kenya's been, as Dr. Harris so eloquently put it, Kenya has committed herself to service to our country, to service to all these folks that she's now working with. For the last 12 years, she's been working very hard for them. She's made a huge commitment on their behalf. She's most likely made huge sacrifices on their behalf, even if we're not talking about the most extreme sacrifices of health. Still, that all that time, all that commitment, all that work. So perhaps Kenya was expecting when she came out some really overt expressions of appreciation, and maybe they're not there. And that not necessarily because Kenya's new colleagues don't care about the military, don't support the military. It might just be a level of ignorance. It might just be a level of uncertainty. Like, how do I express this in the right way? Who knows why it is? But maybe Kenya just felt like was expecting a certain thing and just kind of came out and felt like, oh, this is not the level of appreciation I was hoping to experience. I'm not experiencing it here. And I also want to take the time, as I've spoken with certainly very many veterans and transitioning service members at this point in time, as I do have the privilege of working with folks on a number of different projects. Everyone is different in terms of what their expectations are for this, what their hopes are for this. Some folks don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the thank you so much. It's kind of embarrassing. And it's like, no, I was just doing my job. You don't need to thank me. Other folks, no one's looking for a ticker tape parade, but other folks may feel a little bit like, hey, geez, I really worked hard for you folks. Would like to at least have some notion that there is a cognizance and appreciation of that. Of course, there are things that any employer could do, not again, we don't need to throw Kenya her own personal ticker tape parade, but there's certainly things that every one of us as individuals, every one of us as supervisors, every one of us as employers, apprenticeship managers, we can do to make sure that we are always keeping top of mind how much we appreciate the folks who have made this commitment and sacrifice on our behalf. We should always be doing that. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit there. So let's talk a little bit about what might benefit Kenya as we work through some of these challenges. Now, Kenya might benefit from a mentorship with another veteran, maybe someone who transitioned out 5 years ago and thus has kind of gone through this process, knows what to expect, knows where the challenges are, has some solutions, has some connections. Kind of, do some translation. Like, okay, I know you met Corey today, and believe me, he means well. Maybe he seemed a little strange, but just keep this in mind as you're kind of navigating this amorphous command structure, this amorphous hierarchical structure that we have here. Keep this in mind as you're navigating these teams. Keep this in mind as you're addressing your supervisor and talking with other folks in the workplace and what they're expecting from you. Just little things like that that could be very, very valuable. And while also providing the connection of saying, hey, listen, as a veteran mentor, again, Corey is not a veteran mentor, but I'm speaking from that person's perspective. As a veteran mentor, Kenya, I understand what you're going through. I went through it. So let's talk about that. Let me talk to you as a peer. Let me talk to you as someone who certainly has a real perspective on these things. Or on the flip side, Kenya might want a non-veteran mentor. Maybe Kenya does want to talk to someone like Corey, who, I can tell you, I can talk all day long about what civilian careers are like. Maybe Kenya thinks, you know what? I'll go to the vet center. I'll go to some of my other peers. I'll go to some of my other connections if I want to talk about the veteran specific experience. That's my business. What I want to learn from a mentor in the workplace is how do I navigate this, and who better than someone who's always been on this side of things? So we don't know. Again, but who's going to tell us which is better? Kenya's going to tell us that, and she's going to guide us in that as always. And Kenya might also benefit from the opportunity to talk with other veterans on staff about these challenges, these concerns, these questions, not necessarily as mentors, but perhaps as peer groups, perhaps getting a larger group of folks together over lunch twice a month or once a week or whatever, however frequently folks want, and just kind of talking about these challenges. As much as a reminder that, hey, there's a group of folks here who have gone through this, are going through this, and they're all there to support one another. So continuing this conversation, again, I said that we were going to talk about a little bit more about the challenges related to transition. And this list is partial here, but again, when I say this transition from military service to civilian careers to civilian life, the military to civilian transition, excuse me, this is going to create challenges. It's going to create changes at the very least to pretty much every aspect of a service member's life: their housing, their finances, the things that are already paid for them, like all these things that used to kind of just be taken care of are now going to need to be managed directly by the veteran. And the paycheck then is going to look a little different because the paycheck no longer includes the housing and all these other pieces. So how did someone manage all that kind of stuff? Of course, community. The community that a service member is surrounded with is totally different than the community a veteran is going to be surrounded with. And that community, by and large, is going to consist of folks like me, who hopefully have the best of intentions, hopefully want to appreciate and welcome back and really include Kenya in every aspect of community. But at the same time, there's nothing in the world that I can do to say, well, hey, Kenya, I know exactly what it was like to serve in the military. I didn't do it. I cannot say that, right? That understanding is never going to happen for me. It's not a matter of just watching Patton for the 97th time and then I'll figure it out. No, of course, I can't figure that out. I can't know that. So there's always going to be a gap there from Kenya's perspective. Childcare will change. Medical care will change. And of course, employment will change. So all these aspects, and I'm sure there are many more that we didn't even think of as we're putting this list together. But you can imagine, we always say that when you change jobs, when you change long-standing relationships, and when you change housing, those are the three most stressful things that the majority of us go through. Now, again, If you served in the military and served in combat, presumably that's a quote unquote stress level on a totally different thing here. But as we think about most folks' lives, those points of change are going to be very stressful for any one of us. Well, in this case, Kenya's changing at least all three of those, plus a bunch of other stuff. So if everything goes perfectly, this is still a very high stress, high pressure kind of process that she's going through. So transition can create financial, social, and emotional strains, of course. And just as we can try to imagine this a little bit, moving to a place where almost every aspect of your life, including who you spend that life with, and that all of that changes all at once. We said we were going to talk about this. Of course, this is a very difficult and a very sad thing to talk about, but it is in this period of transition that veterans experience suicidal ideation at much higher rates than at any other. So it's in this early stages of this transition that some of the highest rates of suicidal ideation occur for veterans. And we will remind you as we talk about that, about the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline, that we want to be able to refer others to, that we may avail ourselves of if and when we need that. But that is, I say that not simply to be grim. I say that as a way of saying, if we're talking about the level of pressure here, well, we see what it can result in. And so we have to, of course, take this transition very seriously. And we have to be as supportive as we can be in thinking proactively about how we can support folks. Not that, of course, a registered apprenticeship program is there as a suicide prevention program, right? Those are two different things. We don't expect a registered apprenticeship manager to offer direct counseling, obviously. However, we do expect folks to be cognizant of these issues, know what the resources are, and know how to be thinking about how to support folks in these processes. So further talking about support in transition, when we think about this, really as we're trying to support a veteran in this process, really what we're trying to do is support a solid bridge between their military experience and their new civilian experience. And a bridge to creating new economic connections, a bridge to creating new housing, new medical care, new family support connections, new social connections. It's a bridge to creating a new civilian life as a consequence of this transition process. And of course, it begins with understanding need. And as we've said, to understand Kenya's needs, unlike what we've been doing in this session, understanding Kenya's needs means talking with Kenya, hearing from her what her needs are. But some questions we can also ask ourselves as we look inward at ourselves, at our employer, at our registered apprenticeship program. So we look at those things, so we can ask ourselves some questions. First of all, are there other veterans in our registered apprenticeship program, in our team, in our company? Well, of course, if there are, and we certainly hope there are, because that is going, just on a bottom line basis, that is going to be good for our company to have veterans in it. That's a very skilled and dedicated group that we want included in our workplace, of course. But it also means that, well, okay, now if there are other veterans here, that means we have the opportunity to support peer-related connections, whether that's mentorships or just groups of peer folks getting together. So then we ask, is that something we already have? Is there a formal group, a veterans group that we have, or even an informal one? Does it seem like, hey, yeah, a bunch of folks get together every other Thursday and they have lunch together. The company didn't tell them to do it. It wasn't this kind of official thing. It just sort of happened. Well, that's great. We don't need to get involved in that. We don't need to interfere with that, but we certainly can make sure that we are supporting it. We can connect with that group and say, hey, we love that you're doing this. We love that you are supporting yourselves in this way. What can the company do to better support you? And by the way, as you're having these conversations, talking about some of your challenges in transition, talking about some of your challenges that you experience as veterans in the workplace, well, tell us, are there different policies, different procedures? Are there other things that this company can be doing, not just to support you, Kenya, but to support every future veteran, every future transitioning service member that we hope to recruit and engage in our workplace? So, and if you're listening to me talking about this and you're thinking like, oh, boy, Corey, I'm so busy already. Now I got to go, and we're going to try and set up these peer groups, and we're going to do all this stuff. Well, I would honestly say in response to that, that this is something where one of the great things about this is we need it to be led by and directed by the folks who are going to participate in it, right? This is not something where Corey, the non-veteran, is going to come in and set all this up. All I can do is kind of create a space for this and say, hey, this is for you folks. Make of this what you will. Tell us what you need, but otherwise, you've got to lead this. You, the veterans in this company, have to lead this because it's yours, right? That we want it to be yours. We want it to be owned by you, defined by you, directed by you. So I say that not to help us get out of a little extra work, but by definition, we want these peer-driven groups to be driven by the group of peers that we're talking about, right? And then finally, we would ask, how are mentors matched with mentees in our apprenticeship program? But, do we consider things like military experience, veteran experience, disability? Do we consider other identity style features as we're thinking about making those connections? And really, again, that doesn't have to be a super complex thing. That's really just about saying, at some point in time, did we ask Kenya, hey, what will be the best kind of mentorship connection for you? What do you need to know? What do you want to benefit from this? How do you want to benefit from this mentorship relationship? And how can we make sure that that is aligned as well as it possibly can be? So some of our partners if we've looked internally, it's like, okay, actually we haven't yet done a good enough job of recruiting veterans and transitioning service members. So we need to look externally to other resources that are out there. And sort of partner up with other folks that are out there. The Department of Veterans Affairs, of course, we all know about the VA. Lots of great resources, lots of great supports there. Also some complexities, as comes with any gargantuan bureaucracy, as the VA is. We're also going to find that not all veterans are necessarily going to be terribly comfortable with the VA for a variety of reasons. So we want to know about it. We want to know who's there. Ideally, we want to connect with them and just talk in part to say, hey, we're always looking to recruit new talent. Certainly, there are going to be a lot of folks at the VA who support veterans in career transition, and they can act as a referral source in addition to providing other possible supports. But again, if folks aren't as comfortable with that, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, there are also these great vet centers in a lot of communities now. And really what vet centers are they do a lot, if not all of what the VA does. They do the vast majority of it, but they do it in different settings. They do it in different places. It's a different storefront, a different physical location altogether. It has a different feel. It has a different atmosphere, has a different kind of peer sort of vibe to it. And folks who are not necessarily very comfortable in the VA are typically much more comfortable in vet centers. Obviously, can't speak to every individual person's experience, but these vet centers are definitely worth knowing. And again, great source for recruitment, great source for peer support, great source for a number of other resources. We're going to see other veteran serving organizations and not-for-profit organizations in our communities. They're going to offer things like supportive services. Does someone need a certain kind of equipment or clothing, or do they need support with transportation as they're getting into a new role? Very often those places are going to support career development as well, so they could support us in our efforts to recruit more veterans to our registered apprenticeship program. They're going to do recreation and social events. Across a really wide array of different things. I've heard of everything from, we see, I'm up here in Montana, of course, so we see groups for veterans who want to hunt together, groups for veterans who want to ride horses together, groups for veterans who want to work on ranches together. And a class that I teach with a number of veterans that I work with, I was talking with a woman. She has a little social group that she's put together. It's all about veterans and style, veterans and fashion, right? In addition to not being a veteran, I don't have fashion either. I don't have style. I have none whatsoever. So two areas in which I have no connection whatsoever to offer, but this group does. These are folks getting together and talking about fashion and shopping and style and all these kinds of things, which stereotypically, right, our mind doesn't necessarily go to. Is that something a veteran's going to be interested in? Well, that just reminds us, as Dr. Harris said, that when we're talking about folks who are military members, folks who are veterans, we're talking about as wide an array of possible people, as wide an array of possible interests and strengths and concerns and needs as we could possibly imagine. So great stuff that's there as well. And then finally, we're going to see opportunities for counseling, care, other kinds of support, child care. And you're probably going to see that in all of these, the VA, the Vet Center, and these not-for-profit communities. Of course, we know about our American Job Centers. We've got our local veterans employment representatives. They coordinate with employers. If we're running a registered apprenticeship program, we had better know our lever, and we can typically find them just by calling up the American Job Center. But their whole job is to say, well, let us connect with employers, let us connect with registered apprenticeship programs to ensure that veterans are getting channeled into these things. That's what those are there for. So we want to definitely be sure to connect with them. Disabled Veterans Outreach Program staff, who I did speak about before as well. They're there to support staff in this, or they're there to support veterans in this transition, kind of helping them meet some of their needs prior to employment, so that they're overcoming some of those barriers. So that's another great resource there. And then finally, for folks who aren't aware of it, if we are working in the American Job Center context, a great thing called priority of service dictates that the AJC, so if we're worried about sending a veteran to an American Job Center thinking like, I don't know, is this the right place for them? Are there going to be services there for them? Are they going to be eligible for things? Well, priority of service says that any service within an American Job Center that a veteran is eligible for, if they meet the basic eligibility criteria, well, they get to jump to the front of the line. So, for example, if there's a resume writing workshop going on and there's one seat left, and Corey and Kenya walk through the door at the exact same time, and we say, we want that, I want that last seat. Corey, whose early career was selling vacuum cleaners and being a substitute teacher, versus Kenya, whose career was in the Army. Well, they're going to say, okay, well, we've got one seat left. And because of priority of service, Corey, you're welcome to come back later. But right now, Kenya's going to go and occupy that last seat. So we definitely want to be sure. And certainly, if we've got AJC folks listening to this as well, you're going to keep that in mind. I'm sure you're aware of this, but we always know that that we, and this is kind of a little, my little flippant way of referring to this, but in my opinion, we want to think of the American Job Center as a veteran serving organization that's also kind enough to serve the rest of folks too. But they're there first and foremost to serve veterans. And then, of course, yes, they do serve many non-veterans, non-transitioning service members as well. But their priority of service is always going to be for veterans in their communities. So we talked a bit about this translation piece before. Again, just how do I, as someone who did not serve in the military, look at Kenya's resume and really understand all the skills, all the competencies, all the experience that she brings to the table? Now, I'm assuming almost everyone on the line here has at least some experience working with our different alphabet soup, publicly funded programs. We know that whenever we're in the public sphere, we're talking about jargon, right? There's always going to be some jargon, acronyms, all that kind of good stuff. Well, the United States military is no exception to that whatsoever. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say there's some jargon going on in the military. When I hear folks describing what their rules are, it sounds like when I'm listening to the quarterback of my football team call out a play. It's like, I don't have any idea what any of that means. It's so arcane, it's so dense. So we've got these resources that are there to exactly translate all the skills that Kenya has into language that I, as a civilian hiring manager, might better be able to understand. So this is going to help us understand what work was done in someone's military occupational specialty, or if they're in a different branch, that term is different as well. But there's always an equivalent of it. What was someone's career focus? What was someone's task focus in this in their military career? The level of specialty of the service member, the level of like how much experience they have, how would we translate that into civilian terms, and then understanding as well the context in which that occurred. I hope it doesn't sound flippant to say, but Imagine taking any one of our jobs, whoever you are, whatever job you do, whether it's doing webinars and telling stupid jokes on webinars, to running registered apprenticeship programs, to whatever else we do. Well, guess what? That job is going to be a little harder, right? If we're doing it in an active combat zone. I think we could say that, right? I don't know for a fact. I've never experienced it, but I'm going to go ahead and say that's got to be true. So if Kenya was not only doing all of this very high level work, but depending on where she was doing it, that's a whole other level of skill and perseverance and focus that, of course, she would need to have. Focus and leadership that she would need to have. Of course, military service involves activities and circumstances that are entirely disconnected from civilian employment. Very, very different. Things that, of course, as I've said 100 times, I simply can't understand. Folks who did not experience it cannot understand. So we look at ONET. We know ONET's great. The ONET's My Next Move for Veterans is fantastic. There are other resources, but of course, we love ONET. We think they do great work. That's a great translation piece. It might not be perfect though, right? So we always need to keep digging in and better understanding what those skills are. Then we also always need to be considering and I hate this term, but I use it all the time nonetheless, all the quote unquote soft skills that come with military service, skills related to leadership, skills related to teamwork, skills related to knowing how to be trained, right? Because folks go through a lot of training, and some of us are better at that than others. I'm not very easy to train, to be perfectly frank. Whereas someone in the military context probably incorporated much more formal skill into their work than I was ever called upon to do. So all these things, leadership, teamwork, trainability, focus, morale, all these things are factors that we want to be considering as we consider all the skills, all the talents, all the benefits that come into our workplace when we're hiring veteran folks. But to continue our understanding of all kinds of benefits, I'm going to hand things back to my friend, Dr. Kimberly Harris, to talk about evaluating the initiative. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you so much for all that you've lifted up to really just drive home, this part of the conversation as we wrap things up. Always, as we get to this part of the conversation where we are talking about the evaluation component and it being an essential component, we talk about this grounding on intent. And I think that Corey has done a great job of, talking about all that is at stake when we are, thinking about what it means and why it is necessary to think about with intentionality of evaluation, and really thinking about what does it really mean to ground on intent, and specifically in this way. And when we're thinking about grounding on intent in this way, we're thinking about what it means to create and really ensure that there is a structured approach in the workplace that enables the initiatives and programs that are designed for veterans to be effective, and make sure that those initiatives are aligned with veterans' needs, right? And Corey's done a great job with talking about that and all that, is at stake, or maybe if not all, if not an exhaustive list, a lot of things that are at stake and why it's so important. So it's really important that what we've conceptualized and what we are designing aligns and is giving service to veterans' needs. We know all of the value that veterans bring into our civilian workplaces based on the incredible work that they've done in their military service. So what does it mean to really define success? We really want to clearly outline what success looks like in terms of veteran outreach, in terms of recruitment, in terms of onboarding and training and integration, and also in terms of the mentorship process. And just as Corey has talked about, he lifted up this, if you have not viewed our disabilities mini webinar, but this phrase that was coined by those in the disability community when talking about advocacy and activism, this notion of nothing about us without us is for us, right? So when we're thinking about veterans, that is super essential as well. We really need to make sure that what we are defining as success, and how we are conceptualizing and developing mentorship programs. We definitely need to have veterans not only in the room, not only have them in mind, not only in the room, but in positions of leadership to help co-create, co-construct those programs as well. Co-creating that plan, collaborating with veterans, working under their leadership, guided by their instruction about, what is the appropriate criteria? How do we assess that? And then also so that we can get a temperature check and get a sense of what do we need, like almost like a gap analysis, if you will, or some form of one. What do we need that might be missing to be able to help or to round out and really build and establish those essential components, right? So we need to make sure that veterans are leading these conversations, guiding, and then also helping us to think through collectively, what do we have and what do we need, right? So that's that co-creation, that defining the success as well. And then making sure that when we get to this, where we are now, the how of it all, the evaluation, that we are regularly assessing the effectiveness of the plan by collecting data and feedback from veterans and other participants, right? We want to make sure that we are making sure that there's fidelity in implementation, there's alignment with need and conceptualization. That's why we want to make sure the veterans are not only in the room, not only on our minds, but leading these conversations, right? So that that design design is appropriate. But then we also want to make sure that we are checking in. And then, of course, that core component of learning from the evaluation. And that means that we want to use the insights from all of these previous steps, led in part and in varying degrees by veterans, in total, in part, but they need we need their voices not only in the room, but I'll just keep emphasizing that, but we need it reflected in the leadership so that as we're conceptualizing what this looks like, their insight and wisdom is present. So we want to make sure that we define success based on lived experience, based on all of the things that we know that that veterans need, and who better to tell us that than the veterans themselves? That we co-create this plan so that we can do, an inventory of what resources do we have, what resources do we need, and then we want to make sure that we evaluate the plan, part of this conversation now, and then we also want to make sure that we learn from that evaluation. So then as we're thinking about that, we want to make sure that, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go back one. But as we're thinking about what does it mean to achieve successful outcomes, we've talked this list here. If you've tuned into our other conversations, it's not new. So all of these things that we've listed here around, how well are we documenting process, and what are we documenting? Who are our partners and our collaborators? Is how scalable is the work? Is it adaptable, or is a massive overhaul required? So as we go through and think through all that we have learned and all that we then need to do based on our learnings, what do we know? Can we proceed just as we are going without tweaking anything? Do we need to tweak a little bit, or do we have to do a massive overhaul? And if we've done a good job of incorporating the learning over time, what we will find is that we will move away from massive overhaul types of responses and corrections to probably little tweaks along the way. Because if we're listening to what the data has to tell us, and if we're collecting the right data, we don't have to do these big shifts and swings. We have to learn from all that is emerging, and we incorporate that into process, and we continue on in service to our priority populations, to our overarching, in service to and for our overarching goals. And so what does some of this look like? What are some of these strategies? Some of which could entail Pre-post transition surveys, right? Getting a sense of from our veterans, the state of play, if you will, or their level of satisfaction and confidence as we are onboarding veterans into the workplace, and then checking in at different times, at different points in time, to get a sense of the degree of change. So, are we seeing that veterans are becoming more comfortable, feeling more engaged, feeling more, taking more ownership of different facets of the work, and feel that they can truly contribute? In the amazing, incredible case study, if you will, that Corey lifted up around Kenya, having this incredibly well-trained veteran who is now transitioning into the civilian space, who does not feel as engaged. And as Corey said, there could be a litany of reasons for that. If we do a really good job of checking in, not to the point of survey fatigue, but really doing a temperature check at appropriate intervals of time, we can get a sense of what's going on. One approach or one strategy or one method is not going to be the end all be all, but it can definitely help in our wisdom gaining and our wisdom sharing, and helping us to be more responsive in the appropriate ways to what's playing out in our workplaces and spaces. Are we also tracking? Well, this is an HR component. So tracking retention rates. But then what are we doing with that information? Exit interviews, we've talked about all of the insight that can be leveraged from an exit interview. Then how do we leverage that information? In what ways are we utilizing that information to ensure that we are shoring up places within our operations that really could utilize and could benefit from the insight and wisdom of those who were not able to stay, right, with our company or with our organization for whatever the reason. But we don't but that is not a wasted thing, right? We take those insights, we take those lessons learned, and we use that to improve process. Also consider things like partnership impact assessments. We've been talking a lot about this, about the fact that, in this work of ensuring that our workforce more better reflects and represents the communities that they serve and engage with, the veterans communities, individuals with disabilities, women, and just the litany of different community members, that we want to make sure that it's not all upon us to do all of the work, and nor should it be, because we really want to leverage the relationships that we have with community and different community members, be they different organizations, affinity groups, whomever. But to ensure that we're leveraging those optimally, it may make sense for us to do certain types of things like impact assessments, to really get a sense of what is the level of impact, what type of impact do our partnerships have internally, across the board, and also with various populations, like and in this case, veterans. So do we have relationships with some of those organizations that Corey lifted up a few slides ago? And what is the impact of veterans within our, organization? So our having and being in relationship with these various groups, how is that translating, if you will, into positive outcomes for veterans within our own organization? How do we measure that? Okay, what metrics are we using? What indicators do we have? And then, keeping track of all of the other types of support services that are available for veterans. Is it a current track? I mean, is it a current list? And making sure that we are in conversation, not only with those entities external, but also, once again, to the veterans that are within our organization. So when we're thinking about what does it mean to achieve these successful outcomes, it's the totality of all these different strategic approaches that we can utilize and should utilize that will make us successful ultimately. But thinking about some of the things that we'll be discussing in future webinars, veterans with disabilities, and some other mini webinars for you to avail yourself of. And we definitely encourage you to please take advantage of those opportunities. And we want to leave you with this, and just being aware of the fact that while both veterans and non-veterans have disabilities, and while many accommodations are the same, there are going to be some nuanced contextual things that really are specific to veterans with disabilities. So it's just going to be important to keep in mind that while some of the disabilities may be similar, there will be some aspects that are quite unique. And that should not mean that we shy away from that, or that we feel intimidated by that. We really should, to overuse this pun, or not a pun, but this term of leaning in. What in what ways can we be of support and of service to our veteran team members, with to help them, walk alongside them as it pertains to some of the unique challenges that they face. So that will be some of the stuff, if you will, that underlies our next conversation as we go deeper into this conversation with veterans, specifically talking about veterans with disabilities. So we encourage you to stick in there with us. We thank you for all of the time that you've spent with us, and we hope that these conversations have been beneficial. And as always, we encourage you to contact the Workforce Hub with any questions that you may have. And you see our email information there on the screen, as well as our website for general inquiries. And we invite you, as always, to stay tuned for all of the things that are emerging from the Supply Chain Workforce Hub. And we thank you for this time.